Hello and welcome back to the Rekt Capital channel, and welcome to today's video update about Bitcoin and Ethereum. We're going to be focusing on these two coins specifically. So let's dive right into my Bitcoin analysis. This is going to be the main chart that we're going to be focusing on in today's video update. But before we do, I'd like to give you a bit of context to this entire move. This was a tweet from May 7th. Here in this tweet, I talk about how range high resistance was turned into a new support, guaranteeing that trend continuation past this level of 9,650, and passing that level would yield a return to the red box that we'll be talking about in today's video. This is essentially the chart that I'm just describing to you guys in that old tweet from May 7th right over here. And once we broke that level, 9,650, we indeed returned to the red area that we're going to be talking about in today's video, because this is the same red area that we've revisited ever since we actually rebounded from the range equilibrium after the correction. So right over here, once we saw this rejection from this supply zone, we returned to the range equilibrium, which really held very well since that point, because this is exactly the point that preceded all of this consolidation within this flagging structure on a macro scale. So it's just great to see that this monthly range is a very useful framework for anticipating these reaction zones for Bitcoin's price. And of course, this range EQ bounce preceded all of this consolidation, which has been bullish to this point. So it's fantastic to see that we've seen a breakout straight into this resistance. That's also the second part that I'd like to talk to you guys about, because this area has been a supply zone that has been plaguing Bitcoin for a very long time. Even if we go back all the way to late October 2019, in fact, this has been a major supply zone. It's been a rejection point for Bitcoin for many months now. Every time we've actually peaked at 10,400, which actually happens to be the very top of this zone. Of course, in this occasion, we got 10,500 because we actually saw a bit of wicking creeping past this actual supply zone. But of course, if we zoom in right over here, we got a lower high for these wicks, which was a very bad sign if we look back at it in hindsight, because this lower high preceded this lower high in the candle bodies, because this is where the very first signs of that sell side psychology really started to creep in. People wanting to actually sell at lower and lower levels, and then this really small portion of price action where we actually saw that shift in psychology, sell side psychology, that translated into something more macro in the candles. In any case though, this supply zone is still very much of interest to us, because at the moment, if we're looking at the price right over here, 10,100 is the bottom of the supply zone. And as you can see right over here, this 10,100 level is being turned into a support. This is what we're really striving for when it comes to Bitcoin's price action. And if you look back to the past over here, a failed support test yields a return to 9,650. And if you guys can remember from what I was just talking about right over here, right, in the old tweet, in the old chart from May 7th, 9,650 figured as a resistance before, right? And now we're probably going to see it figure as a support should we actually see a breakdown after this failed retest attempt, right? Because if it's a failed retest attempt, it'll probably return to a bounce from this level, which in fact is confluent with a pullback just to test this flag resistance into a new support. So essentially speaking, a breakout followed by a pullback into this horizontal confluent with this blue diagonal resistance just to test these as a new support. That's a typical breakout play for any asset really, whether that's Bitcoin or anything else for that matter. So in any case, just zooming in on this portion of price action over here, a return upon a failed retest attempt could be on the cards, of course. That wouldn't be a bad sign necessarily, because of course we are still looking at that sort of breakout play where we see breakout, pull back to test it into support, followed by trend continuation. So that would be all well and good, and we'll talk about this a bit on the weekly time frame as well. But in any case, failed retest attempt would yield a return to 9,650, but a actual good retest attempt, a successful retest attempt from this level would actually yield a return to 10,400. So that would be the top of this supply zone once again. But if we get that, I'd like to actually see how this wick right over here would compare to the price action that we have yet to see develop. Would we actually see a lower high like we saw right over here, right? That would be quite interesting. Let's just keep that in mind going forward. But in any case, those are the scenarios I'm watching for. Breakdown from here upon a failed retest attempt, we go here most likely. A successful retest attempt, and we'll just test this at the top of this supply zone, essentially speaking. But in any case, we are at a major point of rejection. So on a weekly, you can actually see that this is a terrible point of rejection. This is a very strong sell side supply zone. We tend to see rejections from this area time and again. And the real thing to just combat this is to close above 10,400 on the weekly, and that would really change the game for Bitcoin. But at the moment, you can actually see that we've just run into this resistance. We've wicked past into it, much like we've wicked into it over here and over here. So at the moment, things aren't looking too rosy in terms of this THR right over here. I'd also like to bring your attention to what we're actually looking at on the weekly time frame in terms of the macro weekly market structure. We've seen these trend lines figure as a resistance, and of course, I've plotted these trend lines just to showcase different scenarios as to where that resistance, that mid-December 2017 resistance, could extend to. So I've propagated a few trend lines over here, and essentially speaking, we are peaking past the last trend line where we actually saw a wick in around May or at least July 2019. So that was the last fake out before we actually rejected. So what I want to see here, because this is very promising, just to see that we're actually escaping from this macro market structure. We're escaping past a very significant trend line which has extended all the way back to mid-December of 2017. This is still a very strong form of rejection and sell-side pressure for Bitcoin, but we are escaping past this point. So essentially speaking, even if we reject from 10,100 this week, as long as we close on the weekly above 9,800, which is around the point of this red trend line, as long as we do that, this would probably be a retest attempt post breakout from this red trend line. That would be a retest attempt, and that could be a very promising sign for future continuation. So those are the things that I'm watching for when it comes to Bitcoin's price action going forward. Let's look at Ethereum, and this is also going to be an old tweet just to set the stage for what we can look at for Ethereum. This was the ascending triangle that I spoke about in one of my earlier tweets in a long-standing thread that I've been carrying on for a while now, for a few months, since March 20th. Essentially speaking, Ethereum broke down from its ascending triangle and it reached a very valuable support level from which it actually bounced from, and that was essentially the bottom. And ever since that bottom right over here at around $85, I think, or 89, we've curled up in a Morningstar formation and broke back into this ascending triangle. And already April 6th, I spoke about how that was a great weekly close because it was at the time. It has a foot in the door when it comes to fully returning to its macro ascending triangle. So closing above 150 would have been bullish, and of course, we have returned to the macro triangle. And even if you check out the thread, I've updated it today on my Twitter. If you check out the thread, you'll notice all the strings of tweets that I've made updating Ethereum's price action since then. And I've also spoke about how we'd dip to 175 while still maintaining a bullish stance. And indeed, that did happen. We did dip as far as that level. So it was on the money, on the spot when it comes to that pullback for bullish continuation, because we are in a very strong growth cycle for Ethereum. And this growth cycle, if we just cycle back to the old tweet, this growth cycle has been anticipated with this trend line right over here, because this is the next trend line resistance that is standing in the way of Ethereum really returning to the very top of its ascending triangle of around 300 and $315. So this over here, this is around $260. This is the last major resistance, in my opinion, before we actually have the possibility of Ethereum fully challenging for a revisit of the top of its ascending triangle, which is fantastic news to see because Ethereum does have Ethereum 2.0 coming up. And one of the troubles that we're going to have as Ethereum investors is how much exposure should we have to Ethereum as we approach Ethereum 2.0. Of course, I am very excited about that event. So are investors alike when it comes to Ethereum, as you can see from the growth cycle. But in any case, as we approach that event, risk is going to continue to mount, because it'll probably be a buy the hype, sell the news type of event. But in any case, technically speaking, Ethereum is still very much on its way to this black diagonal resistance. And once we breach that, we'll have this area to explore, with the top of the macro ascending triangle being a very key resistance, because of course if we break past that, then it's all systems go for Ethereum, a new bull market most likely. But in any case, thank you so much guys for watching today. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and of course subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm Rekt Capital, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Speak soon.